The twin moons of Vel'Kara had risen by the time Princess Serayne of the Aethori completed her vows, and the silence in the great hall was thick enough to cut with a ceremonial blade. Every noble house of the Aethori dominion had sent a representative to witness the union. They stood in their luminescent robes, silver, violet, deep sea green, their bioluminescent markings pulsing faintly beneath their skin, as was customary when Aethori experienced something they found deeply uncomfortable. And what they found deeply uncomfortable, on this particular evening, was the man standing at Serayne's side. His name was Calen Marsh. He was human. He was 31 years old, of average height for his species, with dark hair, weathered brown skin, and a calm expression that many in the hall had mistaken, tonight, for blankness. He wore no ceremonial armor, no house sigils, no weapons. He had arrived on Vel'Kara 6 months ago, as part of an interplanetary trade delegation, and through a sequence of events that still bewildered half the Aethori court, he was now married to their princess. Serayne herself was extraordinary by any standard. Tall, with the silver-streaked hair common to the royal line, pale violet eyes, and bioluminescent patterns along her collarbones that glowed a deep amber when she was calm, which was most of the time. She was known across 3 star systems as a political strategist of rare brilliance. She had brokered the Vel'Kara peace accords at the age of 22. She had ended the merchant wars through a combination of economic leverage and quietly engineered blackmail that no one had ever formally acknowledged. She was, in every measurable sense, formidable, and she had chosen to marry a human. The reasons, at least the official ones, were diplomatic. The Human Confederation represented a growing power in the Outer Reach, resource-rich, technologically aggressive, and increasingly difficult to ignore. An alliance sealed in marriage was a language every species understood. Serayne had evaluated 7 candidates before choosing Calen. She had read his file 3 times, studied his psychological profile, reviewed his professional history. He had served 8 years in the Confederation's diplomatic corps, had negotiated 3 resource-sharing treaties, spoke 4 human languages and 2 Aethori dialects, and had, by every metric she could find, never once raised his voice in a professional setting. That last detail had caught her attention. She had filed it away and returned to it twice. Still, even she had not been fully prepared for the reality of him. He was quiet in a way that was not timidity. She had met timid creatures, and they radiated a particular nervous energy. Calen had no such energy. He observed rooms before entering them. He listened to conversations before joining them. He asked questions that, afterward, you realized had extracted more information than they appeared to request. And he looked at Serayne, often, with an expression she could not classify, which bothered her more than she admitted. After the ceremony, the High Counselor Dravath pulled Serayne aside, under the pretense of offering congratulations. He was old, ancient by human standards, with bioluminescent markings that had faded to near grey with age. He had been her father's closest advisor, and he had opposed this marriage from the beginning. "He is soft," Dravath said quietly, his gaze drifting to Calen across the hall, where her new husband was engaged in polite conversation with a minor trade official. "You have brought softness into the royal line." "I have brought an alliance," Serayne said. "The Confederation respects strength. They will not respect a man who smiles at trade officials." Serayne did not respond, but later that night, lying awake while the twin moons moved slowly across the sky outside her window, she turned the word over in her mind. Soft. She thought of the way Calen had moved through the ceremony, unhurried, unimpressed by spectacle, eyes always tracking the room. She thought of the questions he had asked her, in the months leading up to the wedding, about Aethori inheritance law, about the political relationships between noble houses, about who held the actual economic levers of power, versus who merely appeared to. She had answered, because the questions were intelligent, and she respected intelligence, but she had not, until now, thought carefully about why he was asking them. Serayne had enemies. This was not a surprise. She had made enemies deliberately, the way a sculptor makes negative space. Every power she had consolidated, every treaty she had forced through, every noble house she had outmaneuvered, had left behind a residue of resentment. She kept a mental map of these resentments, and updated it regularly. It was, she believed, one of her greatest political assets. What she had not accounted for was that marrying Calen Marsh would make those enemies restless. The trouble began 8 weeks into the marriage, when Lord Varric of House Corvin, a powerful mining magnate with ambitions that had always exceeded his station, began circulating a quiet campaign suggesting that the princess had compromised herself. The word he used, in whispered conversations in private chambers, was diminished. A princess who chose a human husband had either lost her judgment or lost her options, and either interpretation suggested vulnerability. Serayne became aware of this campaign on a Thursday morning, when her intelligence advisor, a sharp young woman named Osil, delivered her morning briefing with the particular careful neutrality of someone conveying bad news. Serayne listened. She noted the names. She began drafting a response in her mind. That evening she found Calen in the library, which had become his preferred room in the palace. She had noticed, because it adjoined a courtyard where he could observe the comings and goings of palace staff. He was reading an Aethori legal text, and he looked up when she entered. "Lord Varric," she said, without preamble. Calen's set the book down. "What about him?" "He is suggesting I am diminished. That the marriage represents weakness." Calen was quiet for a moment. "Are you asking for my help? Or telling me about a problem you've already solved?" Serayne paused. It was, she realized, a genuinely good question. "I am still deciding," she admitted. He nodded. "Then I'll mention that I had lunch with Varric's financial advisor last week. He's a man named Pell, very fond of Aethori rice wine, moderately indiscreet after the second glass. He mentioned that House Corvin has been over-leveraged since the merchant wars ended. They expanded their mining operations expecting the conflict to continue, and now they're carrying debt they can't service quietly." Serayne looked at him steadily. "That information is not in my intelligence files. Pell isn't important enough to be in your intelligence files. Why did you have lunch with him?" Calen picked up his book again, but did not resume reading. "Because Varric himself won't talk to me. I'm soft apparently." The corner of his mouth moved just slightly. "His people will though." Serayne said nothing. She returned to her chambers and updated her mental map. 3 weeks later, Lord Varric abruptly withdrew his campaign. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no dramatic scene. He simply stopped. The whispers he had started died without new fuel. He was seen, twice, in conversations that appeared to be financial negotiations, and he looked, on both occasions, like a man who had recently discovered that someone knew more about his affairs than he had believed possible. Serayne did not ask Calen directly what had happened, but she watched him more carefully after that. It was Councillor Drevath who moved next, though Serayne did not realize it immediately. The councilless was subtle, she gave him that. He did not act directly. Instead, he began to work on the Confederation's ambassador, a pompous man named Governor Tull, who had never liked Calen, and made little effort to hide it. Drevath suggested, through intermediaries, that Calen had exceeded his mandate by marrying into the royal line, that the Confederation's own diplomatic protocols had been violated, and that Tull might consider raising a formal review of the marriage's legitimacy under Confederation law. It was clever. If Tull raised the review, it would create a diplomatic incident that Serayne would be forced to manage publicly, which would be humiliating. If she responded aggressively, she risked damaging the alliance she had married to create. It was a trap designed to make her choose between her pride and her strategy, and Drevath knew her well enough to know she hated that kind of choice. She was still mapping her response when Calen knocked on her study door at 7 in the morning, and walked in carrying 2 cups of the strong Aethori tea she had not yet admitted to him that she liked. "Tull isn't going to file the review," he said, sitting down across from her. She took the tea. "Explain." I sent a message to the Confederation's Oversight Board 3 days ago, not about the marriage, about Tull's expense reports from the last 2 years. He's been filing for accommodations he didn't take and meals he didn't eat. It's not enormous, but it's enough for a formal inquiry, and he knows it. He's going to be very busy for the next few months managing that, and he has no interest in additionally drawing attention to himself with a review of our marriage. Serayne set the tea down. You investigated the ambassador's expense reports. I noticed some inconsistencies when I was reviewing the delegation's budget allocation. I'm thorough. How long have you had that information? About 4 months. You've been holding it. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. His expression was the same as always. Calm, attentive, faintly watchful. She thought of what Dreveth had said, soft. She thought of how soft things behaved. They yielded, they absorbed, they gave way. Calen did none of these things. He was simply invisible to people who weren't paying close attention, and he had, she was beginning to understand, been relying on exactly that. Who else are you watching? She asked. Everyone. And have you found things? On most of them, yes. Serayne was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the morning light was turning the palace gardens gold. You came to Vel'Kara as a trade delegate, she said finally. But your file says you spent 2 years in the Confederation's intelligence division before the diplomatic corps. Yes. That was not in the summary I was given. No, Calen agreed. It wasn't. She studied him. Did you arrange for it to be omitted? He met her eyes. I was given a file by the delegation committee. I didn't add to it or take from it. But you knew what was in it. A pause. Yes. Serayne picked up her tea again. She felt something shift in her understanding of the last 7 months. Not a dramatic revision, but a slow recalibration. Like a star chart being adjusted for drift. She had thought she was the one who had selected him. She began to wonder, now, how much of that selection had been genuinely hers. Dreveth, she said. I know, Calen said. He's been working against us for months, 6 weeks specifically in an organized way. Before that it was general opposition. He was my father's advisor, I know. I also know that when your father died, Dreveth redirected 3 separate inheritance assets into a trust that technically belongs to your father's estate, but functionally benefits House Corvin. He and Varric have been aligned longer than anyone in your court is aware of. Serayne's amber bioluminescence deepened, a tell she usually controlled, but she let it show now. This was significant. This was more than political rivalry. This was a conspiracy that predated her marriage, possibly predated her ascension. It rewrote the map she had been maintaining for years. You found all of this by having lunch with people, she said mostly. Yes. And by reading filing records. They're very boring documents, which is why no one reads them carefully. I find that useful. Serayne moved carefully after that, the way she always moved when the terrain was important. She spent 2 weeks building a record, drawing on Calen's information, and her own intelligence apparatus, piecing together the full shape of what Dreveth and Varric had constructed. It was extensive. It was also, once fully assembled, devastating, not just to both men, but potentially to several other houses, who had participated in smaller ways, believing themselves well concealed. She called the full council on a morning in the 3rd month of her marriage, under the pretense of a budget review. Dreveth sat at his usual place, composed and watchful. Varric was not on the council, but 2 of his associates were. They all settled into their seats, with the particular, comfortable confidence of people who believed they were more informed than the person running the meeting. Serayne let them have that feeling for 11 minutes. Then she placed a single document in the center of the table. The session lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Dreveth had resigned. Varric's financial irregularities were referred to the Economic Tribunal. 2 council members requested immediate transfers to ceremonial posts with no political function, which Serayne granted, because she was capable of mercy when mercy was strategic. No one shouted. No one was arrested in a dramatic public spectacle. No one gave a speech. Everything happened the way Serayne preferred things to happen, precisely, completely, and without unnecessary theatre. That evening, she found Calen in the courtyard, watching the twin moons rise. He turned when he heard her. "Dravath is gone," she said. "I heard. You could have brought me this information months ago. You weren't ready to act on it then," he said. "You need a Tull situation resolved first, or any move on Dravath would have looked reactive and opened you to the Confederation angle. The sequence mattered." Serayne looked at him. "You've been managing the sequence. I've been watching the sequence. What you did with it is entirely yours." She was quiet for a moment. The moons had cleared the horizon now, washing the courtyard in pale silver light. In it, her bioluminescent markings glowed softly. "My court thinks you are soft," she said. "Your court thinks many things. I thought you were soft." He looked at her with that calm expression she had never quite been able to classify. Up close in the moonlight, she thought she finally understood it. It was not blankness, it was not distance, it was patience, the specific, practiced patience of someone who had learned long ago that the world shows you everything you need if you simply wait and pay attention. "Does it matter what I am?" he asked. "If the outcome is the same." Serayne considered this for a long moment. Then, for the first time in the 7 months of their acquaintance, she smiled. Not the controlled, diplomatic expression she wore in council chambers, but something genuine, edges unguarded. "No," she said. "I suppose it doesn't." In the months that followed, the court adjusted. Not because Serayne announced anything, or because Calen made any visible claim to power. He never did. He continued to have lunch with minor officials. He continued to read aethery legal texts in the library. He continued to ask quiet questions that seemed, in the moment, harmless. But word traveled, as it always does in courts. Small details accumulated. People began to notice that problems near the princess had a way of resolving themselves before she was required to act dramatically. That opponents who moved against her tended to discover, inconveniently, that someone had been paying close attention to their affairs, that the human she had married, who said little and smiled rarely, had a kind of stillness that was increasingly difficult to dismiss. The aethery word for it, when someone finally used it in a council meeting, was Vel'Kara, a term with no perfect human translation, meaning something between the calm before a storm knows itself and the patience of deep water. It was a term of respect. Serayne heard the word and did not comment on it. That evening, she mentioned it to Calen. He thought about it for a moment. "How do you translate it?" he asked. "The closest human equivalent," she said, "is probably dangerous." Calen nodded once, the way he always did when something confirmed a calculation he had already made. "That works," he said, and outside, over Vel'Kara, the twin moons continued their slow and patient arc across the sky, illuminating a palace where the